The evening of October 27, 2002, seemed like it would be a typical one. Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce, a socialite and respected figure in her community, had spent it playing tennis with a friend. When an unexpected rain shower began, she quickly made her way back to her home in the upscale gated community of Carmel. Her plan was to relax in a bath before welcoming a massage therapist she had scheduled to meet. But when Carlos Carrascosa, her husband, opened the door to their house, he could not have imagined what he would find inside. In the fall of 2002, under highly unusual circumstances, Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce, a prominent Argentine socialite, public figure and heiress to a multi-million-dollar fortune, tragically lost her life. Initially, the incident was classified as a domestic accident, and no criminal investigation was launched. However, the case was riddled with inconsistencies and suspicious details. The investigation began when one of the paramedics who responded to the call that day realized something was wrong. He sensed that he was in the presence of a crime scene, and the behavior of those present seemed strange, as if they were trying to conceal evidence and cover their tracks. Who was Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce? Maria Marta Garcia Belsunce, later Carrascosa after marriage, was born on April 24, 1952, in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. She grew up in a wealthy, large family of noble descent, which was part of Argentina's high society. She received an excellent education, earning a degree in sociology, and also graduated from a prestigious business school, setting the stage for a successful career. At the age of 19, the young and beautiful Maria Marta married Argentine businessman Carlos Carrascosa, who was 6 years her senior. They remained married for over 30 years until her tragic passing in the fall of 2002, though the couple never had children together. Garcia Belsunce was not just an accomplished sociologist and businesswoman. She was also known as a prominent socialite, and she and her husband were actively involved in charitable work. In the mid-1990s, Maria Marta became the vice president of an organization dedicated to finding missing children. She excelled in all her endeavors while remaining a kind, approachable, and sociable person, beloved by everyone who knew her. Carlos, on the other hand, had a rather questionable reputation and was suspected of having connections with the criminal world, although there was never any conclusive proof to support these claims. An exclusive club for the elite. Back in the mid-1970s, the young couple Carrascosa, along with Maria Marta's parents, were among the first investors in the construction of the elite residential complex known as Carmel. Over time, this place became something of a private club for the very wealthy and famous. Gaining access without special permission was impossible, even for law enforcement, which played a crucial role in the unfolding of this story. A tragic evening turned into a mystery. When Carlos returned home that evening, he found Maria Marta unresponsive in the bathroom. Initially, her death was reported as an accident, with the theory being that she slipped and hit her head on a faucet. However, things quickly became murky. The first responders were taken aback by how the family members and close friends acted that night. Instead of the expected panic, there was a peculiar calmness, and their behavior seemed coordinated, as if they were trying to ensure that no one outside their circle learned too much about what had happened. The first suspicions arose when the autopsy revealed injuries inconsistent with a simple fall. As questions grew, so did the pressure on the investigators, and what started as a tragic but straightforward case soon became one of the most controversial investigations in Argentina's history. This is where the twists and turns begin, where secrets start to emerge, and where the shocking truth that lay hidden in the shadows of this high society scandal finally started to come to light. By the late 1990s, in search of a quieter and more measured life, Maria Marta decided to move out of the bustling Buenos Aires to the gated community of Carmel, where she and her husband owned a spacious, comfortable home. The complex spanned approximately 250 acres, with over 300 plots at that time. It had everything needed for families with children of all ages to live comfortably, and for those who enjoyed an active lifestyle, there were numerous sports fields, swimming pools, and both indoor and outdoor courts for soccer, basketball, volleyball, golf, tennis, and more. Around the perimeter of the Carmel complex, There were multiple surveillance cameras and alarm systems, as well as several security checkpoints with strict rules and round-the-clock security to ensure peace and order. Most of the residents were very wealthy and quite well-known individuals whose peace and privacy were not to be disturbed. Violent crime or tragic accident. On Sunday, October 27, 2002, Maria Marta and Carlos were visiting their friends, the Benil couple, who lived within Carmel. It was a regular weekend day, the weather was warm, and after lunch, Garcia Belsunce, together with her close friend Viviana Benil, decided to go to the tennis court to get some exercise, play, and enjoy their time. Meanwhile, Carlos went to visit his brother-in-law Guillermo and his wife Irene, with plans to watch a soccer game together. That day, Maria Marta had a scheduled appointment with a massage therapist at home at 7 p.m., and she intended to return by that time. However, at around 5 p.m., a sudden downpour began, forcing the friends to stop their game on the court and head home. Since our protagonist was riding a bicycle, she got soaked and decided to take a bath to relax and warm up. At 6:45 p.m., a massage therapist named Beatrice Michelini arrived at one of the security checkpoints. But as no one was allowed to enter the complex without authorization, confirmation was needed from Garcia Belsunce that she was expecting this person. The security team asked the woman to wait while they tried to contact Maria Marta by phone, but no one answered. After several unanswered calls, a decision was made to send a security officer to Maria Marta's house to check if everything was okay. But then Carlos appeared, confirming that the woman who had arrived was indeed his wife's massage therapist, and together they entered the complex grounds. This is where the inconsistencies regarding the subsequent events begin. According to one version, the security guard who had been sent to Maria Marta's house was called back because her husband had arrived. In another version, the guard managed to reach the residence but was stopped by Carrascosa, who assured him that he would handle everything himself. When Carlos arrived at the house, he noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. He asked Beatrice, the massage therapist, to wait outside and went inside alone. He called out to his wife several times, but there was no response. Carlos then instructed the therapist to stay outside as he headed upstairs. Immediately, he noticed a cloud of steam coming from the bathroom, where the door was wide open, and he walked straight in. What he saw was a shocking sight. The room was covered in blood, and Maria Marta was lying face down in a bathtub filled with hot water. Carlos quickly turned off the running water, pulled his wife's body out, and began administering resuscitation efforts. Carlos started shouting for help, and the first to hear him was the massage therapist standing by the door. She rushed inside and was horrified by what she saw. She immediately went to Maria Marta and began performing CPR, while a stunned Carlos, instead of calling an ambulance or emergency services, phoned his brother-in-law, whom he had just visited, to tell him that Maria Marta had had an accident. His voice sounded so strange that at first, the family members didn't think anything serious had happened. Nevertheless, Guillermo and Irene immediately set off for the Garcia Belsunce house, thinking their help might be needed. It wasn't until about 10 minutes after finding the body that Carlos finally called for an ambulance. By then, Maria Marta's brother and his wife had already arrived at the house, and a panicked Irene called for another medical team before rushing outside to find a neighbor who was a doctor, hoping he could assist. Unfortunately, he too was unable to help. A hasty cleanup. Around 7:30 p.m., the first ambulance arrived at the house. A doctor named Juan Gabriel Gordon immediately began resuscitation, using a defibrillator and administering adrenaline injections, but it was all in vain. There were no signs of life. By this time, Irene, Guillermo, and Carlos had already contacted all the relatives, informing them of the tragic news, and they began to gather at the house. Soon there were nearly 12 people present, mostly members of the Garcia Belsunce family, but a few neighbors also arrived. The women were crying loudly, while the men tried to comfort them, unsure of what to do next. At approximately 7:45 p.m., a second ambulance arrived with Dr. Santiago Biasi, who, like his colleague, attempted to revive Maria Marta. As Dr. Biasi worked on Maria Marta, who was lying in the hallway, someone from the family decided to start cleaning up a bit. The water in the bathtub was drained, and bloodstains on the floor, faucet, and walls were wiped away. Interestingly, Dr. Gordon himself took part in this process. Santiago was disturbed by what was happening. He immediately asked everyone to stop cleaning and to leave everything as it was. To him, it was clear that things were not as straightforward as they seemed, and this might be a potential crime scene. However, those present disagreed, insisting that it was just a tragic accident. Maria Marta had been about to take a bath, but slipped, hit her head on the faucet, lost consciousness, and drowned. No one listened to the doctor, and they continued cleaning, destroying potential evidence. They justified their actions by saying that the family, especially her sisters and mother, were in shock, and the sight of blood puddles and a bathtub filled with red-tinted water was traumatizing them even more. Police denied access to the scene. Around 8 p.m., a police car arrived at the Carmel complex, and the security guard immediately assumed that the officers were heading to the Garcia Belsunce house. However, following protocol, he needed to confirm this before letting anyone in. He called Carlos, who told him that no one had called the police, and there was no need for them to be there, as this was merely an accident. It is worth noting that no one had actually contacted law enforcement. By coincidence, a patrol car happened to be nearby, and the officers, noticing that 2 ambulances had arrived one after the other at the gated community, decided to check out what was going on. Since the police officers did not have a special warrant or permission and were not sure if any emergency or illegal activity had occurred inside Carmel, they could not enter the elite complex. After waiting for a while and failing to get clearance, they eventually left. Later, the security guards at the complex mentioned that Maria Marta's brother had approached the checkpoint and spoke with the patrol officers for some time before they drove away. This led to rumors that the man had possibly bribed the officers to prevent them from intervening and to keep quiet about what was happening inside Carmel. However, these rumors were never confirmed. Who initiated the investigation? After the medical team confirmed Maria Marta's passing, her relatives moved her body to the bedroom and laid her on the bed. They began tidying her up as if preparing her for a funeral, and then went on to clean the bathroom and hallway more thoroughly. Dr. Santiago Biasi, who was observing the situation, was shocked. He kept asking everyone not to touch the body or to wipe away any marks on the floor and other surfaces, but his requests were ignored. Horacio, Maria Marta's brother, found a strange metallic fragment at the scene. He showed it to Carlos and asked if he knew what it was. Carlos simply shrugged, saying he had no idea and that it was probably just trash. After that, the mysterious object was flushed down the toilet. On Monday, October 28th, Dr. Biasi called a police officer he knew who had connections with the prosecutor's office and shared what he had seen at the Garcia Belsunce house. The officer took this information very seriously and wanted to speak with witnesses. However, he was asked to give the grieving family space and allow them to say their goodbyes to their late relative. Nevertheless, the officer reported the matter to Prosecutor Diego Molina Pico, as well as the police commissioner, requesting a deeper investigation. With the necessary warrant in hand, Pico, along with the commissioner, arrived at the scene. At first, they did not notice anything suspicious, and the deceased woman's relatives insisted it was a terrible accident. However, when they interviewed other witnesses who were not related to Maria Marta, they uncovered surprising details. In particular, Dr. Biasi stated that the head injuries on the woman seemed odd to him, and the bathroom looked more like the scene of a violent crime. He emphasized that he had urged everyone to call the authorities and to not disturb anything until their arrival, but no one heeded his advice. A dubious medical report. After listening to and comparing all the testimonies, the prosecutor requested the official medical report on the woman's death. What he received only raised more questions. The report stated that the 50-year-old Garcia Belsunce had died from sudden cardiac arrest and showed no signs of physical injury. Yet all the witnesses spoke of an accident, a head wound, and pools of blood. Moreover, the place of death field in the document listed Buenos Aires, even though Carmel is not only far from the capital, but also in a different municipality. The document was signed by the widower, Carlos, verifying the accuracy of the information. This was strange, considering Carlos himself had mentioned an accident, but had officially confirmed entirely different details. At this point in the investigation, he became the prime suspect. Since there was no breach in the security system of the complex, it was possible that Carlos had harmed his wife and made it look like a tragic mishap. However, the motive remained unclear, and a further investigation was needed, including a request for the exhumation of the body. 5 gunshots to the head. Nearly a month after her death, Maria Marta's body was exhumed, and the results of the autopsy were completely unexpected. The forensic expert conducting the examination discovered 5 bullet wounds in the skull. 4 of the bullets were lodged inside the skull, while the 5th appeared to have grazed the head, chipping off a piece of the bone. Did this mean that none of the numerous witnesses, including 2 medical professionals, could distinguish gunshot wounds from a head injury caused by a fall? Furthermore, there were signs of a struggle on the woman's face and hands, and blood that did not belong to her was found under her fingernails. The case was immediately reclassified as a homicide. After new details came to light, the victim's brother recalled during a conversation with the investigator about the strange metallic object he had found on the bathroom floor, which he later flushed down the toilet. Since the widower had moved to an apartment in the city, the house had been left vacant after the incident, making it easier for investigators to locate the metallic object that had been discarded in the plumbing. An examination confirmed that the previously unidentified piece of metal was a bullet fragment. These findings, along with inconsistencies in the testimonies of witnesses and official documents, cast suspicion on Maria Marta's family members. The primary suspect, now officially, was Carlos. He was arrested in early 2003 and placed in custody, though he categorically denied any wrongdoing. Motives and investigation. According to one theory, Carrascosa had close ties with a Mexican cartel and was directly involved in money laundering. It was suggested that Maria Marta had accidentally discovered her husband's illegal dealings, and as a law-abiding citizen, she could have reported him to the authorities, leading to her being silenced. Another theory speculated that she not only knew about her husband's activities, but was actively involved herself. However, her conscience had begun to trouble her, and she was on the verge of a breakdown. It was also suggested that Carlos didn't act alone and had at least a couple of accomplices, though their names were never identified. The quick cleanup of the house, the repeated movement of the body, and the fact that law enforcement was initially kept away from the scene were viewed as attempts to cover up evidence of a crime. There was also a more straightforward financial motive. In the event of his wife's death, Carlos stood to inherit all their assets, businesses, and other valuables. While in theory, her parents, siblings, and other relatives could also lay claim to the estate, it was unlikely they would do so. Was there a safe? At some point, while still under investigation, Carlos suddenly mentioned that a small safe had gone missing from their home on the day of the incident. According to him, Maria Marta used this safe to store cash, important documents, checkbooks, and valuable jewelry. He had not mentioned this before, but there had been rumors among the neighbors that the couple kept a significant amount of money at home. It was unclear why the suspect hadn't brought up the safe earlier and whether it was really present in their home, potentially becoming a motive for the crime. The trial against Carrascosa began in 2004, with the prosecutor initially seeking a life sentence. In early 2007, Carlos was found guilty of causing his wife's death and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Carlos spent 5 years behind bars before DNA analysis proved that none of the blood samples found at the scene and on the body matched his. In 2016, he was fully acquitted and released. The court determined that Carrascosa was only guilty of attempting to conceal evidence, the situation with the documents. The issue with the death certificate and the information it contained remained unclear for a long time. However, it was later revealed that the Garcia Belsunce family had signed a pre-prepared death certificate, believing that it was not a case involving a crime. So, the woman had passed away on a Sunday evening, and obtaining the necessary medical certificate for a resident of the suburban complex was not straightforward. Her brother went to a funeral home, but they refused to issue the certificate because the body needed to be examined by forensic experts first to confirm that no crime had taken place. The brother then traveled to a neighboring province with the same request. He explained the situation in detail, emphasizing that Maria Marta had died as a result of a domestic accident at home. According to standard procedure, a medical examiner was supposed to visit the scene and verify the cause of death, but the expert assigned to this task happened to be on medical leave. The funeral home had several pre-signed forms where only the necessary details needed to be filled in. However, if the deceased had any injuries or visible damage, it was mandatory to involve the police to rule out the possibility of foul play. Therefore, the document stated that Maria Marta had died of non-traumatic cardiac arrest. As for the place of death section, they wrote Buenos Aires, supposedly because the plan was to bury her at a cemetery in the capital. Carlos was not present when the certificate was issued, but the check used to pay the funeral home was signed by him. It is unclear why the deceased's brother did not sign the document himself, but the person who issued the certificate copied the widower's signature, claiming that he had personally confirmed all the information in the official report. A new theory and an unexpected suspect. After the charges against Carlos Carrascosa were dropped, a new theory emerged that suggested Maria Marta, who had returned home earlier than expected due to the rain, might have encountered an intruder. This theory made the story about the missing safe seem more plausible and credible. According to the investigation, Garcia Belsunce entered the house, but did not immediately notice the intruder. She managed to go upstairs and turned on the water in the bathtub. Then, she encountered an armed individual, and a brief struggle ensued, during which she managed to scratch him. However, the attacker drew a gun and fired 5 shots at her head from close range. It was believed that the main target for the intruder was the missing small safe, which he managed to take with him. The contents of the mini-vault remained a mystery, but now the case had a motive once again. It's important to remember that the Carmel complex was under 24-hour security, and outsiders simply couldn't enter the premises. This led to the assumption that the perpetrator might have been someone local, but who, owning a home in such an upscale community, would risk robbing their neighbors? The answer came quickly: Nicolas Pachelo. He was known as one of the most controversial and confrontational residents of Carmel, and suspicious incidents seemed to follow him everywhere. For example, he inherited a huge fortune after the mysterious death of his father. Neighbors described Pachelo as a compulsive liar and an incredibly greedy individual. Despite his significant wealth, he had a penchant for stealing, which had turned into an obsession. The locals tended to avoid him, considering him rude, aggressive, and without principles. A possible crime scenario. Rumors among the neighbors suggested that the Garcia Belsunce family kept valuables and a large amount of cash at home, and Nicolas certainly would have known this as well. He lived nearby with his wife and children, which allowed him to observe his future victim, learn her schedule, habits, and so on. The intruder knew that on Sunday, the homeowners would be out until the evening, so he decided to seize the opportunity and steal the safe. However, due to the bad weather, Maria Marta returned home earlier than expected and caught the thief by surprise. He pulled out a gun, leaving the unfortunate woman with no chance of escape. After the confrontation, he took the safe and managed to slip away unnoticed. Since Nicolas had lived in the community for a long time, he knew the locations of all the security cameras and skillfully avoided them. As expected, the new suspect denied any involvement. Nicolas claimed he had an alibi for the time of the incident, stating he spent most of the day with his mother. His mother was supposed to confirm his story in court, but just weeks before the trial, she unexpectedly ended her own life, jumping out of a high-rise building window. She left a note expressing how much she loved her son and that she was leaving all her possessions to him. So who is responsible? DNA samples were taken from all the relatives of the deceased woman who were present at the scene to compare them with those found at the crime scene. Many residents of the Carmel complex, upon learning about this, volunteered to undergo the same procedure to eliminate themselves from the list of suspects. Nicolas also provided a sample, and, to everyone's surprise, it was determined that it was not his blood under the victim's nails. Moreover, no traces of his DNA were found anywhere in the victim's house, so there was no evidence to link Pachelo to the tragic death of the Argentine socialite. However, the man still ended up in prison for a series of burglaries committed in another residential complex and for fraud. Neither the mysterious safe nor the weapon used against Maria Marta has been found to this day. Nicolas Pachelo remains under investigation, and the case of the crime has yet to be closed. As I look back on this case, it's hard not to feel a mix of frustration and sadness. What seemed at first like a straightforward incident has spiraled into a web of unanswered questions, conflicting theories, and loose ends. The story of Maria Marta's tragic death isn't just about what happened that fateful Sunday evening. It's about the secrets, suspicions, and shadows that still linger over Carmel to this day. We've heard about the missing safe, the unusual behavior of those involved, and even the twists that brought Nicolas Pachelo into the spotlight as a prime suspect. Yet despite the years of investigation, courtroom drama, and media frenzy, there's still no definitive answer. Who was really behind this terrible act? Was it someone close to Maria Marta, or was it an outsider who managed to slip through the cracks of Carmel's tight security? To this day, neither the safe nor the weapon has ever been recovered, and Nicolas Pachelo, while serving time for other crimes, has never been conclusively tied to what happened to Maria Marta. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. There's a sense that justice hasn't been fully served, that there are pieces of this puzzle still missing. I know there are still many theories out there, and maybe some of you have your own thoughts on who might be responsible. So what do you think? Could it have been a botched robbery, an act of desperation, or something even more sinister? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until then, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep up with more stories just like this one. Stay safe, everyone.